Hi there, everyone. For those of you already on the line, we'll be waiting just another couple of minutes before we get started. Thanks so much for being here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I am Lacey Jamison. I am the Director of Marketing for ESIG, and I'm very happy to welcome you today to our webinar to explore our new international program. For those of you not familiar with ESIG, we are a membership-based nonprofit organization providing our members with objective information, resources, and networking opportunities in support of clean energy and energy systems integration decisions. We do this through workshops, tutorials, webinars, blogs, working group and task force activities, and producing technical resource materials. For those of you who are members, thank you so much for your support. It makes possible these webinars and other work that we do. And for those of you who are not members, we would love to have you. So please reach out, info@esig.energy for more information. So I'd like to bring to your attention that early bird registration is now open for our spring technical workshop, which will be held March 16th through 19th in Tucson, Arizona. And we really hope to see you there. Our workshops and monthly webinars are open to everyone, so please feel free to visit our website at www.esig.energy or find us on LinkedIn or YouTube to learn more. Okay, so a few quick logistical matters before we get started. First of all, participant lines will be muted for the duration of the webinar to avoid unnecessary distractions. For the Q&A, please use Slido platform at www.slido.com. Enter ESIG8 as the event code. The instructions are also on the bottom of the screen now. You will see a thumbs up button next to the questions to allow you to cast a vote to help us prioritize the questions submitted. We will also plan to save some time at the end of the webinar for Q&A, and then we'll wrap it up at the top of the hour. An email with the link will be provided once the video file has been posted. And we also plan to provide short responses to any unanswered questions after the webinar, so please don't be afraid to ask your questions through Slido. All right, and without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. I will now turn it over to ESIG's Director of International Programs, Alejandro Moreno.
Thanks, Lacey. Wait for the slides to come up. Hopefully everybody can see these. Thanks very much, and welcome to the webinar on ESIG's international engagement. As Lacey said, I'm Alejandro Moreno. I'm the Director of International Programs here at the Energy Systems Integration Group. Previously was at the Department of Energy, managing a lot of their clean energy work for many years, more years than I want to count. Let me start by acknowledging a little bit of inadvertent false advertising. We were planning to have both Debbie Liu and Charlie Smith on. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it. Charlie had a last-minute personal thing come up. But I do want to acknowledge the role that both of them have played in getting this initiative off the ground, and particularly Charlie, who many of you know is the founder and former CEO of ESIG, who has been truly that ESIG has done, and I feel very fortunate that he's investing his time and energy in helping the international work get off the ground. I'll also say that this is going to be a bit of an unusual webinar for ESIG. This is not going to be the sharing of technical results, as most of our webinars are, but really to raise awareness and inform all of you about some of the programmatic plans that we have, and hopefully to get some insights, either now through the Slido platform that Lacey mentioned, or through emails and conversations that I'm very happy to set up afterwards as well. We will have the bulk of the time reserved for questions and answers, so please, if you have them, put them into the Slido chat. I probably have about 20 minutes or so worth of direct conversation. You'll hear from me for about 20 or maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to questions. So just starting from the beginning, the additional to deepened focus on international work and work outside the U.S. is really it's part of a broader suite of growth that we've seen in ESIG over the last couple of years. And we all in the sector, we know that power energy systems are evolving faster than ever. And as a result, the number of different technical areas where sharing information, sharing expertise, sharing experiences is really important. It continues to grow really fast. And you're seeing ESIG expanding in its technical suite of areas and its staff and its structures to meet that demand. And a good example, I strongly encourage all of you to look at the most recent or the first report that's from our Large Loads Task Force that was just published. It's the first of 8 reports. This is one that sets an entirely new framework for forecasting large loads. Just one example of some of the technical areas that we are expanding to be able to cover. And the geographic expansion is really part and parcel of that. I think we all recognize that as energy systems evolve, different regions are going to move faster, some faster than the US. And more importantly, different areas, different countries, different regions will experience circumstances in different orders, there's different timing, and in somewhat different ways. And the set of experiences that we can all learn from, in some ways that we all need to be aware of and learn from to really have the tools to be able to plan and manage our own systems, those will continue to grow really sort of exponentially. And for that reason, at ESIG, we're investigating how we can act and engage much more deeply with dedicated engagements in 4 regions. And the 4 you see here: Europe, China, India, and Southeast Asia. And the goal is both to provide direct benefits, of course, within those regions through the type of knowledge exchange and the peer-to-peer learning programs that ESIG is so well known for. And as I just alluded to, also providing ever greater and more relevant learning opportunities for our US-based membership. Everybody really expanding the scope where everybody can learn from each other. I do want to point out, I would be remiss, and Charlie would hold my toes to the fire if I didn't note that this is a bit more of a change in degree than type, in the sense that ESIG has always been global, in the sense we've had global members for almost as long as we've been around and made a real point of bringing global perspectives to our workshops. But typically our workshops have been in the US and often driven by is really an opportunity to our global engagement, that international learning substantially. So what does this mean in real? What does it mean on the ground? In each country or each region, we will explore the possibility for a mix of events and offerings. Most of those on the left should look pretty familiar to anybody who's familiar with ESIG, but really deciding what types of events on which topics are going to be most valuable in which regions. And so that includes our technical workshops, which are our big flagship events that we hold, usually 2 to 3 days, hold them twice a year in the spring and the fall. Also have a summer workshop, so that type of event that brings everybody together in person. They're training or in person, dedicated trainings on specific topics. Working groups, which are teams of our members that are drawn from different types of organizations across the sector that help focus on specific broad areas. So planning, operations, reliability, market design, and identify the key technical issues that everybody wants to better understand. With task forces, which are temporary groups that are pulled together under the working groups to help shed light or address some of those specific technical issues that are prioritized by the working groups. And then 2 that would really help us be much more effectively grounded in the local context. One is this regional advisory council. And the idea would be effectively to have a local board of 5 to 10 individuals who could help steer and prioritize the overall ESIG work in each region, and local staff. The speed, degree to which we implement any of these in a given region depends on what we find and where we really think, based on the discussions we have and the an assessment of where we can add the most value, what type of work is going to be most impactful where. And on the right, you see a number of global, relatively new or new initiatives or additions to existing initiatives that we think will help strengthen our presence everywhere, including in the US. And that includes training platforms, including a new multilingual online education platform that we'll be launching this year, an enhanced website that should be ready for ready to launch in the next month or so. That'll be both international and in the US, of course. New task force activities. And so we are looking at areas that we can strengthen our task forces and create new task forces under our existing working groups, specifically focused on priorities that are really shared globally. Webinars, and then also where can we prioritize translating and disseminating our 3,000 plus reports and existing materials that we've already developed, and maybe even developing workshops or working groups that aren't necessarily regional specific, but actually global in nature. It's one of the elements that we'd consider. So where do we stand right now? We are at the very beginning. I came on board a few months ago. We have just started the design process for this program. And the goal is by the end of this year, towards the end of this year, to have 2-year work plans in each of those 4 regions that help identify the combination of technical topics and offerings that we would start with in each region, to be able to establish those advisory committees in those regions that we think it would be most valuable, as well as hire local staff, begin 2 or 3 new or expanded core task force activities. We're already starting to do that, to begin the process of translating and disseminating information from our working groups and task forces, and to launch the multilingual online education platform I just mentioned. So all of that, the goal by the end of this year is to have a really clear work plan for each region for the next 2 years and begin with some of those big globally relevant initiatives that we think increase our intellectual and technical foundation to be able to address a much broader set of power systems and organizations. So what specifically might this include from a technical perspective? And again, none of these should really, I think, look surprising or unfamiliar to anybody on here, which I think further reinforces the value of learning globally. Knowing that the broad issues are, of course, similar in many parts of the world, and increasingly the specific events or circumstances that we learn the most from may happen outside the US first. And there's potentially really large value in that. So what are some of the topics that I will say are coming up in some of the conversations we're having as sort of broadly applicable? Of course, stability and system services, particularly in Europe and China. That includes grid forming inverters and grid codes specifying, but also the implementation of those grid codes and the follow-up on them, and the relationship between grid codes and the specific system operation rules. Broad suite of topics around flexibility and the full utilization of renewables on the system, both sources of flexibility and the management and remuneration of it, the connection between flexibility and market design. Large loads planning and operation, of course, is a topic that is in the conversation very much in the US. And what we have certainly heard is many regions are very interested in learning what we're seeing. That's both from a planning and forecasting perspective, but also from a real-time operation perspective, where we see potential sub-second jumps of the scale on the system. It's really unlike any other loads that we've seen. Market design in sort of all elements. Many parts of the world are particularly interested in looking and comparing both elements of US and European design. And we're seeing new market design efforts taking off globally in multiple of the regions and countries that we're looking at. Interconnection processes, I mentioned this I think a minute ago, but also both the codes and their implementation, both interconnection of generation and interconnection increasingly of load. Reliability and O&M. We have a big reliability and O&M working group, comprises a number of OEMs and project developers. There's been significant interest in potentially taking that. And that's one of the candidates that you could imagine might be a good candidate for a global group, since so many of the specific issues are pretty universal. Cross-border transmission planning and power flows, particularly in those regions that are multinational, where cross-border transmission planning is becoming increasingly, say, the government, local governments, and international bodies are increasingly interested in pushing cross-border transmission planning. And system integration with gas and heat, particularly, obviously a really big issue in Europe right now. These are examples, and some of the topics, these are high-level categories, of course. What we will be deciding over the next 9 months or so, 6 to 9 months, is really which of those areas to prioritize in which countries, and what specific topics within those are likely to be the most relevant for the kind of knowledge exchange that we have now. And what are the formats and the forums where we can most effectively create the trusted venues for dialogue? What I will say, my exposure to ESIG came largely when I was in government service. And what I valued so much was not just the technical information, but the ability of ESIG to create venues where people were willing to share information openly, and where people really wanted and so want to learn from their colleagues, from their peers, often from equally from peers in similar organizations, as well as peers in different types of organizations that may be able to shed light on a particular system challenge in a different way. And creating that's easier said than done. I probably don't need to say that to anyone. Having the technical information is absolutely necessary, and having the top sort of top level technical insights is the foundation of everything. But really understanding what situations, what types of groupings, and what types of forums are going to lead to that level of trust and that type of open conversation that I think to many of us makes ESIG what it is. And we have, I think, a lot of thoughts and experience that we bring to bear on this, but we also at the same time want to be very cognizant that different parts of the world work differently, that what works in one place may not necessarily be immediately sort of cut and paste replicable somewhere else. And then we need to be really thoughtful about cultivating and curating and creating those opportunities in a way that works on the ground locally. Get back to where I can change my screen. So then take a pause and just let folks take a look at these questions here, and I'll walk through a little bit what we're getting at for each of these. But this is what I'd really like to take the time to talk through. I am really both in this conversation here on Slido, but very and interested in talking to anybody who has strong feelings about what they would like to see on the ground, what they would most like to learn from. If you are in one of the regions, I know the time zone for this meeting isn't terribly conducive to many of the regions that we're working in. We will send the video here, and also considering doing further editions of this in time zones that work better in Asia in particular. But the questions that we really want to focus on here are both one suite of questions within each region. Of course, what are the technical challenges? As we've said, that's the fundamental question. But where are people also most interested in learning from within their region? Sometimes within the sub-region, within the country, within the state. Where is knowledge much more likely to come from, or people are much more interested in learning globally, or learning from parallel regions or parallel systems that may not be within their region, but have similar characteristics. And so identifying some of those connection points that may not be as obvious, hearing who do you want to learn from, which system do you find most parallel to yours, or that you think is most likely to have lessons back for you. What type of technical collaboration, what type of knowledge sharing are you most interested in? This is, of course, a technical consideration, but it's just as much a consideration of what people have time for. and what are some of the other events and some of the other opportunities for knowledge sharing that are already excellent on the ground, and hearing also how what ESIG can do can fit into some of those organizations and some of those opportunities that are there. We know a lot of them, but by no means do we know all of them. Organizations and this type of collaborative approach around the grid in many of the regions that we're looking at is expanding pretty dramatically. A lot of new organizations, a lot of new initiatives are coming up, and we want to make sure, because ESIG's value comes from connecting and amplifying the voices that already exist, not directly competing with them. The more that's existing on the ground, the more opportunity there is for us to establish that connection. But of course, the more careful and thoughtful we have to be about how to pull in those voices. Also, who are the essential participants for not just technical credibility, which again, we know a lot of them, but we don't know all of them, but also for the type of trust that we talked about before. And sometimes those are very different types of organizations in different countries. We recognize, and so getting perspectives of which are the organizations that need to be part of a conversation or part of the group in order to ensure both a level of openness and a level of confidence in the technical capabilities, and to be able to translate the information sharing back into action from the people that ultimately participate in ESIG. So those are a highlight of the questions within each region. Globally, again, what specific systems, who do you want to hear from? What technical challenges are most of interest, or most commonly of interest across multiple different geographic constituencies? What countries, which organizations, which systems do people most want to learn from? Where at an individual regional level, there's an element of technical matchmaking and potentially cultural matchmaking as well. At a global level, where are some of the most consensus topics and systems that people are across multiple different regions or really feel that they can learn from and want to hear directly from? What topics, again, also from a working group and task force perspective, does everybody agree additional technical information would go the farthest, whether it's shared experiences, best practices, or some of the analytical work that our task forces do on a regular basis? What are those topics that are really broadly shared? And then things that seem simple but aren't, but what languages and formats should be prioritized for which different type of existing material? We probably can't translate all of the materials that we have, but we wouldn't need to. We would want to focus on ensuring that the regions that we work in are getting those existing ESIG materials that are most relevant to them, and getting them in formats that are going to work the best for them. Again, like with all of these are areas where we come with a lot of expertise. We have a lot of perspectives on this, but we don't know everything. And we want to make a point of listening to people in the region and on the ground that can help take our globalized technical expertise here and ensure that it is as effective and as driven by local needs and ways of learning as possible. And lastly, which websites capabilities would be most valuable? We will have a broad website refresh that's coming up, as I said, fairly soon. But what are some of the specific capabilities that we might want to consider continuing to add and build on that would be specific and simple as, how are people using a website versus an app in individual countries, optimizing for different ways of accessing the information as well. So a little less than half an hour, which is unusual and a success for me. That's all I have for the broadcast out portion. It's really important for all of us at ESIG that our members and everybody who's interested knows what we are doing, both for awareness and potential engagement as in ESIG International. But as I said at the beginning, also because everything that we do bring, we know that there's an infinite number of things that we don't know. And many of you with experience in regions that we're looking at, and who might want to learn from the countries and regions that we're looking at, have incredibly valuable insight that you can provide us. And so I am going to, with that, turn over to Slido. I'm going to leave these questions up on the screen. And please, as you have questions, thoughts, insights, comments, put them in Slido. We've got a little over half an hour to discuss them. If you don't want to put them in Slido. For whatever reason, that's totally fine. My email address is right here. Take that down, send me an email. I would love to hear from you. We can set up a phone call or a conversation if that's easier. Feel free. Every email you send, I will read. I will do my best to respond to all of them, but it will genuinely appreciate everything that we hear. So going back here to Slido, let's see. We have a number of questions. So how can existing non-US members be the most helpful with the program? Whoever asked that, thank you. By reaching out to me and setting up a conversation, telling us what you most would want to hear and what you would most want to share. Also telling us who else you think we may want to talk to. I've had more conversations than I can count so far, and that is just a drop in the bucket for those that I intend to have. So that will be really appreciated. I will say if you're an existing ESIG member from outside the US, I would love to hear from you. Please reach out. Can you share more about the outreach you've done and what kind of preliminary response you've gotten? Absolutely. We have had a fairly substantial series of conversations and meetings both with members, non-members, potential members, and system planners and operators in Europe, to an extent in China, starting to in India and Southeast Asia. At the same time, we have also, I've been talking pretty extensively to other organizations that are active in driving great information, that are more international organizations that are active in each country and region as well, understanding both, what are the technical priorities, a lot of the questions we've talked about today, but also what are some of the institutional barrier structures to make this type of engagement actually functional and work and bring people around the table. We've gotten probably more preliminary response than I could talk through in half an hour. I'm very happy to talk. None of it is particularly secret or sensitive. In general, the feedback that we've gotten is that the type of trusted dialogue that ESIG has fostered in the US would be very valuable in other regions. In some regions, it's an essential function of sharing technical information and driving up the overall technical sophistication of the system. In others, it's part of a pretty crowded landscape of collaborative activities, but the specific modality sort of is the only word I can think of for that type of informal trusted venue isn't terribly common. In terms of preliminary responses for topics, a lot of the topics that I put on the slide before, but everything from obviously market design is a huge upcoming issue in China and in a couple other places, to a lot of system stability and reliability issues, flexibility, both on the distribution side and through bulk systems, storage, both planning and real-time operation, including grid forming from storage. So a number of issues that, again, are in their overall context not unusual and probably really familiar to most people. Sometimes the individual priorities within that, the technical priorities within that, my hunches will differ. From John Simonelli. Hi, John. Can real-time operations climb your priority list? Operations traditionally is the last to know, and that has to stop. I will say my priority list was not a ladder. They were put there. If it were in alphabetical order, it wouldn't be any different at this point. We are at but very sincerely, I want to emphasize, we are at the very beginning of these conversations. Real-time operations are likely to be a top priority in many parts of the world. But John, I would love to talk to you more about that. If there are ways that ESIG can help address the problem that you talk about, that operations traditionally is the last to know, that's a meaningful value proposition for us. Understanding each region's, country's governance landscape would be very helpful in exchanges. Is there interest in systems mapping to that end? It's not just very helpful, I think it's absolutely essential. The role of governance, the role of government, and the specifics of how decisions are made, how information is translated into decisions, both of those are going to be essential for thinking how we structure this. So yes, I don't know exactly what type of systems mapping you're referring to in that question, but I'd love to learn more, and would be very interested to talk to whoever wrote that question. How did ESIG choose the potential regions? That's a little bit before my time, but it's based on where we thought there was the greatest global impact for the development of, I think in terms of the size of the energy systems in each region and the ability for those systems to continue to need the type of integration information over the next handful of years that ESIG really focuses on. I will say, these are the initial regions. I think we are focused on scoping and designing what the programs might look there. But a lot of the work that we're doing globally is meant to be relevant more broadly. And certainly if people are interested in and see this type of value, or see value for this type of work in other regions, I don't think anybody is eliminating that possibility down the road either. Is ESIG open to partnering with other member-based nonprofits to explore joint working groups and initiatives in 2026 and beyond? A lot of the organizations that I'm talking to right now, that all of us are talking to, are other nonprofits, both member-based and not member-based. And I think we're very open. We're open to any structures that we think are going to be most effective. I will say at a minimum, because again, what ESIG does is so dependent on amplifying and connecting people that are already working in the field in a particular region, that aligning, coordinating with, and certainly having mutual awareness of those organizations is essential. And would imagine that they may well be participants in ESIG venues or offerings in workshops, but also potentially working hand in glove with organizations where there's a real mutual benefit is absolutely on the table. Ralph from Amprion, will ESIG cooperate or compete with similar entities in the regions considered, e.g. ENTSO-E in Europe? What would be the added value of an ESIG engagement? Certainly cooperate. ENTSO-E is a really good example of an organization we know well and are cooperating with. There'd be no ability for us to compete with ENTSO-E. For those that don't know ENTSO-E, they're the sort of quasi-governmental entity that coordinates and represents all the transmission system operators in Europe. We would work closely with them and are already in discussions with them about how to do so. Value, I won't say this with respect to any specific entity. Where we are hearing that the added value, particularly in a place, in those areas where there's very high technical capabilities and a lot of people talking to each other, for lack of a better term, is in creating some of the more topically coherent and thematically prioritized combination of the open, trusted conversations and peer-to-peer learning in a way that's a little bit less, perhaps less formal than some other collaborative processes, combined with some of the analytical work that's really bottoms up, driven by the types of working groups and task forces we have. But what exactly that looks like, how that differs region to region, that's what the design process is meant to find out. And that is said very well. What is the added value of an ESIG engagement? That's the fundamental question that we're asking ourselves with every combination of offer and topic that we look at. In the UK, the next grid code update will be based on a limit of the AC grid's phase jump angle. Is this part of the new group's work? From Eric at Ensor. It could be. I mean, certainly the grid code update, as I mentioned before, and grid codes in general are from everything we're seeing, a pretty topic of substantial interest in Europe and elsewhere. And any element of those, I think probably just looking at, and this is saying I'm neither an electrical engineer nor am I aware of the specifics of the next UK grid code update, but we'd probably be a little bit broader than only one particular element of that. but looking at the grid code updates in regions and in countries we look at is very much on the table. As the role of US-based or focused researchers in these new international activities, specifically in the context of our current engagement. I can tell you what I see the role as, but I think that's it, frankly will differ country to country and topic to topic. I think there's clearly a lot of interest in certain topics still in learning from the US. Large loads is a really good example where, you know, we've been heard over and over that it's very clear that the US is leading in this particular area, and US practitioners in this case, and researchers to an extent as well, their information is deeply desired globally. And I think that's true in a lot of places as well. I think this offers an opportunity for deeper collaboration between US researchers and international researchers. And it does allow access for US researchers to a broader range of entities that may directly be interested in taking action upon that research, and vice versa. Right? It certainly allows, if this is done well, US companies and members to benefit from a broader suite of research activities as well. All that said, I mean, ESIG is not a deep research organization. We bring together a lot of academics and we showcase a lot of the academic work. Traditionally, the work that we do in our task force and working groups, that type of work is the extent of the research that we do ourselves in-house. Comment from Eric Lewis. I think this is similar. Also looking at the Great Britain GB grid code, will use the NSOE control for a grid forming inverter that does not change its voltage after a transient. I can send data. Please do. We'd love to talk to you more about that. And again, looking at grid codes is one of the issues that ESIG has done very much historically in the past. We know it's a big issue in Europe, but also looking at the relationship between what's in the grid code itself and the operational and system rules that govern how devices are actually responding in individual circumstances and incidents, and being able to correlate those two is part of what we've seen some significant interest in in particular in the European side. ESIG is already, quote, in quotes, international with members in Europe, Australia, and Asia. Do you plan on having tech workshops in these regions? This is a conversation that we are having extensively. I can answer this in two ways. I'm not sure how much of a difference there is between the two ways, but at least for now, there are the workshops, the tech workshops that would be put together as part of this initial 2-year work plan that I talked about. We're very likely to have tech workshops in Europe and in Asia that are part of this international sort of deepening our international foundations. We may also have traditional ESIG workshops extend more broadly. At some point, that may become a distinction without a difference. And that's what I meant before. I mean, this is really about ESIG becoming more international, more broadly. So the simple answer to that is yes. We are very much interested in and hoping to have workshops as well as many of the other types of offerings in at least in Europe and Asia of those 3 regions, the 3 that you mentioned. We might in Australia, I mean, certainly Australia has a ton to teach us as well. So, but that's not part of the initial regions that we're looking at right now. How do you want to govern the overall program so that the most important and beneficial voices are heard? If I had a really pat answer for that, I would probably not need to do the next 9 months of work. It's at the highest level the most important question. I think a big part of ESIG so valuable in my experience is that really deep the knowledge of the participants, and to an extent curation is the word that comes to mind, but really being thoughtful about which voices are the most technically astute and most trusted on a given topic, and really carefully bringing those to the table at each of our workshops and events. And that's, that is what ESIG does in many ways. And I give all the credit in the world to Charlie and to Debbie for continuing that. It's as much of an art as a science, as I think Charlie would be the first to say. But the only way you can even begin to it is really knowing the people. Knowing the people well, knowing what they bring, and knowing how to position them within the context of a workshop or within the context of a broader organization, in a way that their skills are going to shine and that the information that they have is going to be most useful to the audience and best received. There's also, I mean, some element of what I spoke about before, some of the institutional structures that we would put in place in each region, including the regional advisory councils, because we can start, but we're not going to come into a region and know everybody overnight. We're lucky to have a lot of friends, colleagues, and contacts in many of these regions, but we will also need to rely we will need to rely on them and rely on their trusted partners in each region as well, to elevate the voices that they know are most valuable. So there's that element of it as well. Is the idea for ESIG to create new regional dialogues for ESIG to pull more folks from the Europe, China, India, and Southeast Asia into its current programming, or some combination? That's a great question. That hits a little bit at where I said something about there being a distinction without a difference. It's a little bit of both. So we are the primary sort of scope as set forth right now is to create, at least in some of the regions, new regional dialogues. I think ultimately, as we look at the value proposition globally, that goes hand in hand with ESIG more broadly, whether it's part of the sort of this international element, or it's just ESIG itself becoming more deeply engaged internationally to be able to pull more folks from each of the regions, to be able to send more folks. And by having some of those regional dialogues, to me, the hope is those dialogues, those participants in ESIG, that we make it easier to have globally relevant exchanges as well. There are a lot of logistics challenges, obviously, around the global exchanges, whether travel or time zones. But yeah, I think I'm not thinking of those two as mutually exclusive, but rather as mutually reinforcing aspects of this. Does ESIG also explore emerging economies, large grids like India, where challenges are very unique and setting an example for other global South countries? Absolutely. I will say, I think India we can also learn from India here in the US, but also there are many areas where India will provide tremendous value proposition and learning to, for example, Southeast Asia. And so, yeah, in each of the regions, understanding both where they're most interested in learning, but also where they're most interested in sharing. And that I don't think I've mentioned, that's come up quite a bit as well. And that's critical for the success of this, right? You can't learn unless somebody's willing to share. And there are many specific organizations, specific systems in the countries and regions that we're looking at that I think will be really important, provide really important, valuable lessons in context for other ones. And so really being able to facilitate that is I think, a big part of what we're looking at. And something that I think is implied in this question, but setting an example for other global South countries across the board goes back then to some of those global dissemination and offerings that we have. If we're starting to really collect, learn from, bring together system operators, planners, project developers in India and in Southeast Asia, for example, then that also gives us much more material that we can share through the website, through the multilingual education platform, through translations that may be very relevant for regions that are beyond the four that we're talking about. How do you plan on incorporating technical with operational information, as the two are vastly different? Assuming you mean operational information here in terms of program operation, not system operation. I would consider system operation highly technical, but they are very different. and we're looking at both to an extent separately. I will say I think they overlap in the sense of certain types of technical work and certain types of technical experience may lend themselves to certain types of structures or operational structures or implementing structures a little bit more than others. But in general, they're very different topics. We need to look at both of them. And yeah, again, assuming I'm in understanding this question correctly, the operational structure, the information that we get on that is going to be foundational to what we are able to offer and how we go about doing that and how we engage with others. And the technical information is much more the sort of what we end up doing, what specific information we end up focusing on. I will say if you meant something different by that, shoot me an email. Happy to have a longer conversation, because operational information could be a few different things in that context. I am not seeing any more questions on Slido. I don't know, Lacey, if you see any others.
I think that's all of them.
Terrific. Well, I don't think anybody is going to complain if we give everybody a little bit of time back. I do want to say thank you for joining, for listening, for the questions you asked. Those were really good questions. Many of them are ones that we are starting to think about, but certainly showed, I think, some real insight into what is going to determine the success ultimately of this. And again, let me reshare the last slide with my email address. Please reach out. I would love to hear from you. Would love to get your insights. And also, we will record this, as Lacey said at the beginning. Please feel free to share the recording with others. Put others in touch with me that you think might be interested in knowing more, or might be interested in engaging, or just have strong opinions. If there's one thing all of us do have, it's strong opinions, and we are using that very much to our advantage here. So thank you again, and look forward to hopefully talking to and meeting many of you in follow-up conversations.